Taiwu's gaze made even the ancient counselor pause. "You have studied our history?" Taiwu said. His voice was quiet, but it carried through the vast hall with perfect clarity. "Then you should know something about humanity." Beth tilted his head. "And what is that?" "We do not stay in cages," Taiwu replied. "We do not accept death quietly, and we do not forget those who try to destroy us." A murmur spread through the assembled species. This was not how prisoners were supposed to behave. This was not the fear they expected, Taiwu smiled. It was a small smile, barely visible, but it was there. "You have made your first mistake," he said. "You have given us a reason to unite. You have given us a common enemy, and you have shown us exactly what the galaxy thinks of peace." The guards moved closer, weapons raised. The barriers tightened. But Taiwu's words had already done their work. They had been broadcast across the station. They had been heard by every species present, and somewhere, deep in the void between stars, a small ship called the Horizon was watching and recording everything. The war had not yet begun, but its first shot had been fired. Lieutenant Yunji Choi had never disobeyed an order in her life. She had graduated at the top of her class. She had served with honor on 3 different vessels. She believed in the chain of command the way some people believed in gods. But when the message came through ordering all human vessels to power down and surrender, she did something she never thought she would do. She said no. "Kill all external systems," she commanded.
"I'll go dark."
"Not a single signal leaves this ship." Her crew looked at her with wide eyes. There were only 12 of them aboard the Horizon. Skeleton crew left behind when the diplomatic team had been taken to the station. They were not soldiers. They were scientists and engineers. And now their lieutenant was asking them to become ghosts. "They will find us," whispered Junho, the youngest of the crew. His hands were shaking on his console. "Not if we are careful," Yangji replied. "The galaxy is very big, and we are very small. We watch, we record, and when the time is right, we send everything home." The Horizon drifted into the shadow of an asteroid, its engines cold, its lights dead. Around them, the Council's blockade spread like a net across the solar system. Thousands of ships, millions of soldiers, all of them ready to crush humanity before it could become the threat they feared. On Earth, the news arrived like a bomb. Director Minho Yoon stood in the command center of the United Defense Coalition, watching the screens fill with chaos. Riots in the streets. Governments collapsing. People screaming that the end had come, and then something changed. It started small. A general in one country reached out to a general in another. Old enemies who had spent decades pointing weapons at each other suddenly realized they had a common problem. Politicians who had never agreed on anything found themselves agreeing on this. Humanity would not die quietly. Within 6 months, Earth was united. The flags of nations still flew. Beneath them was a new symbol, a blue circle containing every continent bound together by chains of stars. The message was clear. "We are one, Minho." Watched the transformation with wonder and fear. He had dreamed of human unity his whole life. He had never imagined it would take the threat of extinction to achieve it. "Begin construction," he ordered. "Every shipyard, every factory, every resource we have, we build." The factories roared to life. Mines that had been closed for decades reopened. Scientists who had been working on competing projects suddenly found themselves sharing data, sharing ideas, sharing hope. The petty divisions of the past melted away in the fire of survival. Far away on Orion 7, Captain Jinho Park sat in a cell and planned. The council called it a cultural assessment facility. Jinho called it a prison. The walls were clean. The food was adequate. The guards were polite. But the doors were locked, and the barriers were strong. And every day brought new interrogations disguised as research. Dr. Hannah turned these sessions into weapons. "Tell me about your mating rituals," the alien researcher would ask. And Hannah would answer with questions of her own. "What is your social structure? How many species serve on the council? What happened to species that were classified before us?" The researchers never noticed how much they revealed. They were used to dealing with frightened prisoners, not curious scientists. Hannah collected information, like others collected treasures. building a picture of the council that no human had ever seen before. "They are afraid of us," she told Jinho one night, when the guards were not listening. "Not because of what we have done, but because of what we represent. Change. Evolution. The unknown." Jinho nodded slowly. "How many Category Red species have there been?" Hannah's face grew dark. "I do not know yet, but I know that none of them exist anymore." The words hung between them like a death sentence. None of them exist anymore. The council did not contain threats. They destroyed them. But Jinho was not ready to accept destruction. In the depths of the station, where the important species never looked, there lived workers. Maintenance crews, cleaners, the forgotten people of the galaxy. The ones who kept the lights on and the air flowing, while the council made their grand decisions. Jinho talked to them. He listened to their stories. He learned that many of them came from species that had once been classified, once been judged, once been considered lesser. They had survived by becoming invisible, by making themselves useful, by accepting their place at the bottom of the galactic order. "You were like us once," Jinho said to a creature named Ball, whose people had been conquered 1,000 years ago. "You were proud. You were free." Ball's many eyes blinked slowly. "That was long ago. We have learned to serve. What if you did not have to serve?" Jinho asked. "What if there was another way?" He planted seeds of rebellion in the dark corners of the station. He did not know when they would grow. He only knew that, when the time came, humanity would not stand alone. Meanwhile, on the edge of council space, Sergeant Dong-Soo Kim and his team were making a discovery that would change everything. They had been on a routine supply run when the blockade was announced. Cut off from Earth, hunted by council ships, they had fled into uncharted territory. For months, they had survived on stolen fuel and salvaged food, always one step ahead of their pursuers. Then they found the outpost. It was old, ancient, abandoned for centuries. Hidden in the heart of a dying nebula, the council's symbols were everywhere, but they were faded, forgotten. This was a place that had been erased from official records. Inside, Dong-Soo found the archives. "Sir," his tech specialist said, her voice trembling, "you need to see this." The files were encrypted, but human ingenuity was not easily stopped. Within hours, they had broken through. What they found made Dong-Soo's blood run cold. 17 species. 17 civilizations classified as Category Red over the past million years. Each one had been given the same verdict as humanity: quarantine, containment. Each one had been systematically exterminated. The records were detailed. Planets burned. Populations scattered. Survivors hunted down across generations until not a single member of the species remained. The council had not just killed them. They had erased them from history, removing every trace that they had ever existed. Dong-Soo stared at the screen for a long time. Then he began copying everything. "Get this to Earth," he ordered. "Get this to everyone. The galaxy needs to know what the council really is." The message was sent. The truth was loose. And somewhere in the darkness of space, humanity began to understand exactly what they were fighting against. Not conquerors, exterminators. The quarantine was not a pause. It was the beginning of an execution. And humanity had just discovered the knife. 2 years had passed since the quarantine began. 2 years since humanity had been locked in a cage and left to die. The council had expected collapse. They had expected panic, starvation, surrender. They had not expected Naeong Beek. She was 26 years old when the blockade was announced. A junior engineer at a small research facility working on theoretical propulsion systems that most people said would never work. When the ships stopped coming and the supplies ran low, most of her colleagues gave up. Nahun worked harder. The data transmissions from the horizon arrived in fragments. Pieces of alien technology. Scans of council ship engines. Mathematical formulas that made no sense to anyone who had not spent their life dreaming of faster-than-light travel. Naeong spent 18 months barely sleeping, barely eating, living on coffee and determination. And then, on a cold morning in December, she made it work. The first human FTL drive was ugly. It was loud. It shook so hard that the test ship nearly fell apart. But it moved. In the blink of an eye, a small vessel jumped from Earth's orbit to the edge of the solar system. The journey that would have taken months was completed in seconds. Director Minho received the news with tears in his eyes. How soon can we build more? Already started, Naong replied. The designs are simple, brutal. Nothing elegant about them. But they work, and we can mass produce them in weeks. The shipyards that had been quietly building for 2 years suddenly had purpose. Vessels unlike anything the galaxy had seen began to roll off the assembly lines. They were not beautiful. They were not graceful. They were weapons, designed by a species that had spent its entire history fighting for survival. Colonel Hunhua Kung looked at the fleet assembled before him and felt something he had not felt in a long time. Pride. They expect us to surrender, he told his crews. They expect us to beg. They think we are weak because we are young, small because we are new. He paused, letting his words sink in. Today, we show them what humans do when we are cornered. We fight. The first battle of the breakout lasted 17 minutes. The Council blockade had grown comfortable. For 2 years, nothing had come out of Earth's solar system. The guards had become lazy. The patrols had become routine. When human ships suddenly appeared in their midst, moving faster than anything they had ever seen, they did not know how to react. Hyenwoo's tactics were unlike anything in Council military doctrine. He split his fleet into dozens of small groups. He attacked from every direction at once. He feinted retreats, then struck again from unexpected angles. When one of his ships was cornered, the crew would fly directly at the enemy, weapons blazing, ready to take their enemies. With them, if they could not escape, the Council forces were used to fighting species that followed rules. Humanity had no rules. Only victory or death. By the time reinforcements arrived, the blockade was broken. A corridor of space had been carved through the Council's lines, and human ships were pouring through like water through a cracked dam. On Orion 7, Captain Jinho watched the news spread through the station. The Council's propaganda channels tried to spin the story. A minor setback. A temporary breach. Nothing to worry about. But the workers knew the truth. They had seen the footage. They had watched human ships dance through formations that should have been unbreakable. And they had heard the message that Ambassador Tiwu broadcast across every frequency in the galaxy. We did not come to conquer. Tiwu's voice echoed through corridors and chambers and cargo holds. We came in peace. We extended our hands in friendship, and you responded with chains and cages and the promise of extinction. The broadcast played on every screen. Council guards scrambled to shut it down, but for every channel they blocked, 2 more appeared. Humanity had learned the galaxy's technology well. You call us Category Red? Taiwu continued. You call us a threat. Perhaps you are right. But you made us this way. You taught us that the galaxy respects only strength. You taught us that peace is for the weak. In the depths of the station, Ball and his people listened. Other forgotten species gathered in hidden places, sharing the words like precious secrets. For 1,000 years, they had been told that resistance was impossible. Now they watched a young species break free, and something stirred in their hearts towed. Hope. You walk the path you chose for us now, Taiwu's voice thundered. And we will not stop until every cage is opened. Every chain is broken. Every species that has been crushed beneath the Councils. Heel is given the chance to rise. The uprising began in the maintenance tunnels. Jinho led a small group of humans and allies through passages that the guards never bothered to patrol. They moved in silence, disabling security systems, opening locked doors, freeing prisoners from cells that the Council had forgotten existed. Dr. Hannah made contact with something remarkable. Deep in the station's abandoned sections, hidden from Council eyes, she found the remnant. 3 species that had been classified. Category Red, 3 species that the Council claimed to have destroyed. They had survived for centuries in the shadows, watching, waiting, preserving the knowledge of civilizations that had been erased from history. You are not alone, their leader told Hannah. Her name was Vera, and her people had been hunted for 800 years. The council has lied. They have hidden their crimes. But we remember. Then help us, Hannah said. Help us expose the truth. Vera's ancient eyes studied the human woman for a long moment. The council's weaknesses are many, she finally said. Their power rests on fear and secrecy. Destroy those, and you destroy them. She gave Hannah everything. The location of the Silence Vaults, where the council stored evidence of their genocides, the access codes that had been preserved through generations, the names of council members who had personally ordered the extinction of entire civilizations. The knowledge was a weapon more powerful than any fleet. Jinho and his team fought their way to the station's communication hub. Guards fell. Alarms screamed. But the workers of Orion 7 had already made their choice. Doors that should have been sealed opened. Systems that should have tracked the escapees mysteriously failed when the human delegation finally reached the docking bay. A stolen ship was waiting for them. The engines were already warm, Gobal said, his many eyes bright with something that might have been joy. Tell the galaxy what we have done here. Tell them that the forgotten can rise. Ginho gripped the creature's hand. Come with us. Our place is here, Ball replied. The revolution has only begun, but you have given us something we had lost. You have given us courage. The ship launched into the void. Behind them, Orion 7 burned with the fires of rebellion. Ahead of them, Earth's fleet emerged from FTL at the edge of Council space. The war had truly begun, and humanity was no longer alone. The war spread across 100 star systems like wildfire. Council forces, who had ruled unchallenged for millions of years, suddenly found themselves facing an enemy they could not understand. Every battle was different. Every strategy evolved. Humanity fought like no species had ever fought before. Private Jiho Lim was 19 years old when he landed on Verathri. He had joined the military 6 months after the quarantine was announced. One of millions of young people who had volunteered to defend their home. He had trained hard. He had believed he was ready. He was not ready for what he found. The colony of Verathri has been one of humanity's first settlements outside the solar system, established just before first contact. When the council declared their verdict, the colonists had been rounded up and placed in camps. Temporary containment, the council called it, for their own protection. Jiho's squad moved through the camp in silence. The buildings were neat, the paths were clean, and the people inside were hollow. 2 years of imprisonment had broken something in them. Children who had never known freedom. Adults who had forgotten what hope felt like. Families torn apart, scattered to different facilities, never knowing if their loved ones were alive or dead. An old woman grabbed Jiho's arm as he passed. Her grip was weak, but her eyes were fierce. You came, she whispered. We prayed every night. We never stopped believing. And you came. Jiho did not know what to say. He was a soldier, trained for combat, not for this. But he held her hand and promised that she would see Earth again. Minji Seo recorded everything. She was a journalist, bedded with the liberation forces to document the war for Earth's population. She had covered disasters and conflicts before. She thought she understood suffering. She was wrong. Her broadcast reached Earth within hours. Millions of people watched the footage of the camps, the prisoners, the conditions that the council had called humane containment.
Oh, they saw the faces of their brothers and sisters.
Their neighbors and friends, reduced to shadows of themselves. The anger that swept across humanity was unlike anything before. This was not about politics or territory or resources. This was personal. Every human alive felt the crime in their bones. On the other side of the galaxy, High Arbiter Solon watched the broadcast with cold eyes. He was ancient, older than most stars in his system. The leader of the council for longer than humanity had existed as a species. He had overseen the extinction of 17 civilizations. He had maintained order across countless worlds. And now, for the first time in his endless life, he was afraid. They are winning, his advisor said, stating the obvious. They are adapting, Solon corrected. Every battle teaches them something new. Every defeat makes them stronger. They learn from their mistakes faster than any species we have ever encountered. The Council's military doctrine was rigid, perfected over millions of years. It had crushed every threat they had ever faced. But humanity did not fight like other species. They improvised. They sacrificed. They refused to accept that any battle was truly lost. When the Council sent a massive fleet, humanity scattered like leaves in the wind, then regrouped to strike at supply lines. When the Council fortified a position, humans found ways around it, through it, over it. When conventional tactics failed, humans invented new ones, sometimes in the middle of battle. Destroy them, Solon ordered. Use the contingency. The contingency was a bioweapon, designed centuries ago for exactly this purpose. It targeted specific genetic markers, spreading through air and water, killing only the species it was programmed to destroy. It had ended 3 civilizations before they even knew they were under attack. The weapon was released on 12 human worlds simultaneously, for 3 weeks. The galaxy waited for news of humanity's collapse. The Council's propaganda channels prepared victory announcements. Military forces positioned themselves to sweep up the survivors. Then the reports started coming in. Minimal casualties, a stunned Council officer transmitted, "The weapon is not functioning as designed. The humans are adapting." Humanity's immune systems, forged through millennia of plagues and diseases, had done what no other species could do. They had fought off the bioweapon. Not perfectly, not without loss, but enough. What should have been extinction became another illness to overcome. Dr. Hannah and the remnant scientists studied the weapon's genetic code and found something more valuable than a cure. They found proof. The bioweapon contained signatures that linked directly to Council research facilities. The genetic targeting data proved that the Council had studied human biology extensively. Planning this attack from the moment of first contact, the entire trial, the classification, the quarantine, it had all been a delay while they prepared humanity's execution. "Send it everywhere," Hannah commanded. "Every species, every world, every ship with a receiver. Let them see what the Council truly is." The broadcast that followed shattered the galaxy's foundations. Species that had trusted the Council for generations watched in horror as the truth unfolded. The 17 extinctions, the bioweapons, the camps. The lies that had propped up an empire of fear for 10 million years. Defections began within hours. The Silurian Collective, one of the Council's oldest members, announced they would no longer participate in the war against humanity. The Varith system declared independence. A dozen other species withdrew their fleets, refusing to fight for genocidal masters. Captain Jinho led a strike team to the Silence Vaults while the galaxy reeled from the revelations. The Remnant's information had been perfect. The facility was hidden in the heart of a dead system, protected by security that had not been updated in centuries. The Council had never imagined anyone would find it. Inside, Ginho found rooms filled with records, artifacts from destroyed civilizations, art that would never be seen again, music that would never be heard. The Council had not just killed species, they had erased cultures, histories, futures. "Document everything," Jinho ordered. "We take what we can carry. We broadcast what we cannot." The second wave of revelations hit the galaxy like a hammer. Names of Council members who had signed extinction orders. Transcripts of meetings where genocide was discussed like routine business. Evidence that the classification system itself was designed to identify and eliminate any species that might one day challenge Council authority. The coalition of the condemned formed in the aftermath. Humans and remnant species standing together. Worlds that had suffered under Council rule joining the alliance. What had started as one species fighting for survival became a revolution that spanned the stars. High Arbiter Solon watched his empire crumble and made one final decision. If the Council was to fall, humanity would fall with it. He gathered the last loyal fleets, prepared the most powerful weapons remaining, and he set course for Earth. Determined to destroy the species that had destroyed everything he had built. The final battle was coming, and the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. Admiral Yoonji Choi stood on the bridge of her flagship and watched the Council's homeworld fill the view screen. It was a beautiful planet, covered in silver cities and crystalline oceans. For 10 million years, it had been the center of galactic power. Today, it was surrounded by the largest fleet in human history. "All ships report ready," her tactical officer announced. "Weapons charged, awaiting orders." The order that everyone expected was simple: fire. Destroy the world that had tried to destroy humanity. Repay extinction with extinction. The crews were ready. The weapons were primed. Justice, many believed, demanded revenge. Yoonji said nothing for a long moment. She thought about the camps on Vera 3. She thought about the bioweapon that had been designed to kill every human alive. She thought about the 17 species whose names had been erased from history. "Hold fire," she finally said. "Maintain position. No attack without my direct order." Confusion rippled through the fleet. This was not the plan. This was not what they had fought for. "Admiral," her executive officer said carefully, "the Council is preparing their defenses. If we wait, we lose our advantage." "We have not come here to become what they were," Yoonji replied. "We have come here to end what they are. There's a difference." Ambassador Taiwu's ship slipped through the fleet formation, broadcasting on an open channel that every vessel in the system could receive. His request was simple. He wanted to address the Galactic Assembly. Not as a prisoner this time. Not as a defendant. As a prosecutor. High Arbiter Solon could have refused, could have ordered his remaining forces to fight to the last ship. But something had changed in the ancient leader. Perhaps he had finally understood that his empire was already gone. Perhaps he wanted to face his accusers with the dignity he believed he deserved. The assembly hall where humanity had first been condemned is now the site of the Council's trial. The chamber was packed with representatives from across the galaxy. Species that had been council members sat beside species that had been their victims. The remnant walked openly for the first time in centuries, no longer hiding from a power that could no longer hunt them. And at the center of it all stood Ambassador Taiwu, gray-haired and calm, holding the weight of justice in his hands. "For 10 million years, Taiwu began, his voice carrying through the vast hall. "This council has claimed to maintain order, to protect the galaxy, to guide civilization toward peace and prosperity." The holographic display flickered to life. Images filled the chamber. The silence vaults. The bioweapons. The camps. The faces of billions who had died because they were deemed threats to an order they never threatened. "This is what order looked like," Taiwu continued. "This is what protection meant. 17 species erased from existence. Countless others crushed beneath the weight of fear. And all of it hidden, buried, forgotten, so that the galaxy would never know the truth. The evidence played for hours. Council members who had voted for genocide were named. Documents that had been classified for millennia were read aloud. Survivors from the remnant species testified, their voices shaking with emotions that had been suppressed for generations. High Arbiter Solon sat in silence through it all. His advisors had fled. His allies had abandoned him. He was alone, the last symbol of an empire that had ruled through terror. When the evidence was finally finished, Taiwu turned to face him directly. "You have heard the charges," the ambassador said. "You have seen the proof. Do you have anything to say?" Solon rose slowly. He was ancient and tired, but his voice was still strong. "What I did," he said, "I did for the galaxy. Every species we eliminated would have grown into a threat. Every extinction prevented a war that would have killed billions more. We made the hard choices that no one else would make. We carried the burden of civilization on our shoulders." He looked around the chamber, at the faces of species who had once served him, who had once feared him. "And what will you do now?" he asked Taiwu. "You have destroyed us. You have torn down an order that lasted longer than your species has existed. What will you build in its place? Will you become what we were? Will you rule through fear as we did?" The question hung in the air. Every being in the chamber waited for the answer. Taiwu smiled. It was the same small smile he had worn when humanity was first condemned, years ago in this very hall. "You looked at us and saw monsters," he said. "You were right, but not in the way you thought. We are monsters to those who prey on the weak. We are the nightmare of tyrants, or the memory that refuses to be erased. He paused, letting his words sink in. But we are not conquerors. We will not take your throne, will not claim your power. The galaxy does not need another master. It needs a chance to find its own way. The proposal was radical. A new government built not on hierarchy, but on representation. Every species, great or small, would have a voice. Every world, powerful or weak, would have rights. The Commonwealth, they called it. A coalition of equals, humanity would take no special position. They would be one voice among many, no more and no less. The species that had been classified as the galaxy's greatest threat would become its defenders. Sworn to protect those who could not protect themselves, High Arbiter Solon was not executed. He was imprisoned, forced to live out his remaining years watching the galaxy transform into something he never imagined possible. Many thought this was mercy. Taiwu called it justice. Death is easy, the ambassador explained. Living with what you have done is harder. 30 years later, Jinho Park stood on a hill overlooking his childhood home on Earth. He was old now, his hair white, his body worn by decades of service. But his eyes were still sharp, still watching the stars. A young girl sat beside him, her legs dangling over the edge of the hillside. "What are humans?" she asked. It was a question from a school assignment, but Jinho could tell she wanted a real answer. He thought about his life. The trial on Orion 7. The years of war. The friends he had lost and the enemies he had defeated. The galaxy that had tried to destroy humanity and the galaxy that humanity had helped rebuild. "We are the ones who remember," he finally said. "When everyone else forgets, we remember. The good and the bad. The triumphs and the mistakes. The people we saved and the people we lost." The girl frowned, not quite understanding. Ginho smiled and put his arm around her shoulders. "There are species out there who wanted to erase us," he continued. "They wanted to wipe away every trace that we ever existed. But we survived. And because we survived, we made a promise. We promised to remember everyone. Every species that was destroyed. Every civilization that was erased. Every voice that was silenced. He pointed at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Up there, right now, people are telling stories about species that nobody else remembers. They are playing music that would have been lost forever. They are teaching children about cultures that almost disappeared. The girl's eyes widened as she began to understand. "That is what humans are," Jinho said softly. "We are the ones who remember. And because we remember, we make sure it never happens again." The stars grew brighter as night fell. Somewhere in the galaxy, ships carried the memories of the lost. Somewhere, the children of the remnant were learning that their ancestors had not been forgotten. Somewhere, the galaxy was healing. Humanity had been called the greatest threat in the universe. Perhaps they were, but they had chosen to be a threat to cruelty, to tyranny, to the silence that had swallowed so many voices. They had chosen to remember. And in remembering, they had made sure the galaxy would never forget.